There can be no denying that the Lost Agent arc is definitely the most polarising part of the Bleach story. Some fans see this moment as a decline in the story's quality, to go along with a decline in popularity after the climactic battle with Aizen at the end of the Arrancar arc, whereas other fans think that the Lost Agent arc actually does something new and refreshing with the series, introducing cool new ideas such as a darker tone and a focus on narrower, smaller stakes with a more personal feeling overall. As the hopeless Bleach defender that I am, I fall into the second camp who actually really enjoys the Lost Agent arc for what it brings to the series. Admittedly, reading it weekly, it was a little tough. The first 10 to 15 chapters or so feel quite slow, especially after the come down of the big Aizen fight, but I actually think the arc turns into something really special, where Kubo, it almost feels like he was experimenting with this darker tone, but I really appreciate the laser focus on the main group of friends in Karakura Town, as they did feel a little bit pushed to the wayside at the end of the Arrancar arc as power levels began to skyrocket. So to get this renewed focus on them now was really refreshing and nice to see. And honestly, I think it helped with their development and the dynamic between them as a group of friends. But I think the main driver behind the Lost Agent arc was actually the villainous Fullbringer Tsukishima Shukuro and his ability Book of the End. Now, of course, the major plot twist of the Lost Agent arc is that it turns out that Tsukishima is actually working for somebody else, the first substitute Shinigami Ginjo Kugo, who was posing as Ichigo's closest ally through the majority of this arc. But because of that, I do feel like Tsukishima is the main driving villainous force, the main person causing conflict in this arc, and really that does all come from his ability Book of the End. And Tsukishima himself is also a fascinating character, one of my favourites in fact. I do tend to favour the bad guys in general, but Tsukishima is a really interesting one. And being the secondary villain of an entire story arc, of course he will get character analysis in the future, but in this video I want to take a look at why I think he might be the most reprehensible character in the series, his ability Book of the End and how it really warped things for the characters in this arc, but also how it subverts some of Bleach's major themes about friendship and forging the bonds of friendship with other people. And before we begin with this video, if you haven't subscribed yet guys, we are still pushing forward towards 40,000 subs by the end of the year, so if you love Bleach, you're in the perfect place for content just like this, so hit that button now. And don't forget to give the video a thumbs up as well if you enjoyed it, because it does help with the algorithm, and don't forget to hit the notification bell to stay up to date with all of my videos. The Lost Agent arc is a funny little thing, and it is actually something I do want to spend more time on in a separate video talking about the arc as a whole, but it's a 55 chapter or so interlude basically between the massive Arrancar arc and the massive 1000-Year Blood War arc, so I think it's fair to say it can be overlooked at times, but it really does offer something special, and I think that is the down-to-earth perspective of the main Karakura gang. It's a really nice and, in my opinion, tightly knit story arc that looks at how these main characters function, how they all work together as a group, but also what can pull them apart. And I think Kubo does really cool things with this main group of friends in this arc. And as I said already, the catalyst for that is the character of Tsukishima and his power, Book of the End. As I'm sure you know, by using Book of the End throughout the arc, Tsukishima was essentially able to turn Ichigo's closest friends and allies against him, leading to one of the most unique final showdowns in Bleach I've ever seen, and it honestly felt like a transformation of the genre to the point where Bleach sometimes feels like a horror movie, and I think it was done really well and actually pulled off pretty masterfully. Kubo uses Book of the End to write in some really nice twists, like there's almost like a triple bluff on whether Ginjo is actually a good guy or a bad guy, and I think for the most part it's done really well. And the man behind that is Tsukishima, a Fullbringer and one of the most interesting villains in Bleach. Now, just to talk about him very briefly, I was very annoyed in the manga when it turned out that we didn't get any backstory for him. That was one of my biggest complaints of the entire arc. It really seemed like Kubo was building to a satisfying backstory about Tsukishima and Ginjo, but he really did just leave it as a single-page teaser featuring the two of them considerably many years ago. And I remember reading the next chapter the next week and just staring in disbelief at the fact that we weren't actually getting a flashback for these two. That was a big disappointment, and Ginjo's story is rightfully being fleshed out in Can't Fear Your Own World, which I really do appreciate. But over the years, I've actually kind of mellowed out on the idea of Tsukishima not having a backstory, because I think it actually works really well for this character. The fact that he's a blank slate actually ties in really nicely with the fact that his entire ability is about creating false truths, essentially. So we all know Book of the End, when he strikes a victim with it, he's able to insert himself into their past as someone they once knew, they once loved, they once worked with, fought alongside, all that sort of thing. As far as anyone he hits with Book of the End is concerned, Tsukishima has played a major and vital role in their life, and obviously none of it is true. So I like the fact that this character, who is all about creating false bonds, has no backstory of his own. He is a vessel for these lies, and I think it actually kind of works really well. Like, he creates this anarchy seemingly for like no real motive, but I think it is really cool as well that he seems to like come from nowhere. Ginjo is a slightly more traditional bad guy with a slightly more traditional motive. He wants to crush the Soul Reapers that he believes betrayed him. But Tsukishima is kind of just doing it because it feels like he just wants to watch everyone squirm about his power, and he is a really kind of nasty individual in that way. I'll talk more about his relationship with Ginjo a little bit later because it does feed into his motive somewhat, but I do think that Tsukishima comes across in the Lost Agent arc as one of the darkest characters in Bleach, with a total lack of empathy and a total not a care in the world for the damage he's inflicting on Ichigo and his group of friends. So Tsukishima's a really comes across as a really messed up guy with a power to match. But now we may as well talk about his relationship with Ginjo, as these guys are the main villains of the Lost Agent arc, and it does call into question just how evil Tsukishima actually is. So the whole plan, basically Ginjo and Tsukishima's plan, is they are going to push Ichigo to the point of absolute despair, like make him just completely despair, because that will mean that his Fullbring will reach its ultimate maturity and he will become incredibly powerful, and then Ginjo can just steal it and take it and add it to his own powers. That's basically the plan. So Tsukishima is tasked with making Ichigo despair as much as he can, and he does a pretty dang good job of it as well. In my opinion, pushing Ichigo to breaking point probably more so than any villain has in the past. But Tsukishima really is doing this on Ginjo's orders. We do kind of find out the vaguest of motives for Tsukishima being that really he will just do whatever Ginjo tells him, and that kind of disappointed me as well, but that's for another day. But Tsukishima will essentially just do what Ginjo wants, and he almost doesn't know how to function without Ginjo as well, which is a bit of a shame, but it does also go to show you just how kind of warped he actually is. So the question is actually, how evil is Tsukishima? Clearly he has little care in the world about the damage he inflicts on people, and he shows almost a contempt for them as well. Like, he's absolutely happy to completely mess with the minds of characters like Orihime and Chad, even to the point when they begin to break free of Book of the End, he then crams more dangerous memories into their heads. He even gets Orihime to believe that he is her brother, and he gets Chad to believe that he is his abuelo, to the point where they both almost have complete, total mental breakdowns. And Tsukishima does this himself of his own volition. Ginjo even warns him against doing it, saying he's broken many people in the past to the point of uselessness. I think we can infer that Tsukishima takes some kind of pleasure out of what he does. He's definitely a pretty nasty individual, but really he does just work to Ginjo's tune. Even in the 1,000 Year Blood War arc, when they show up right at the end, Tsukishima basically says that the only reason he's there is because Ginjo said they had a debt to repay to Ichigo in the first place. So I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility to say that Tsukishima only cares about Ginjo. He's about the only person he cares for. I think he grows to have some kind of affection for Mo right at the moment of his death, but other than that, he was perfectly willing to kill Mo on Ginjo's orders. So he's a difficult character to place, because I do really think that Kubo makes him out to be an absolute monster, but there's definitely a sympathetic side to him in that Ginjo is almost completely controlling his life, because obviously they've met when Tsukishima was incredibly young. But Book of the End itself, in my opinion, is one of the most interesting abilities in Bleach. It's arguably one of the most brokenly powerful as well. But I like that we see multiple applications of Book of the End throughout the Lost Agent arc. We get to see its most traditional use, which is Tsukishima cutting someone and inserting himself into their past. And as I said earlier, there seems to be multiple levels to this. When Tsukishima cuts Orihime and Chad initially, he just inserts himself as a friend. Now, this is a friend who has been with them a very long time and has participated in major instances in their life, but later on, when Tsukushima fears he is losing his grip on them, he then kind of almost ups the ante and says, I'm actually this person, and I'm actually this person, as opposed to being someone he himself has just made up. So it's a very, very dangerous ability, and again, we do see multiple applications. We see him use it in a fight against Byakuya, which is honestly, in my opinion, the most fascinating use of Book of the End, because it actually covers multiple ground in this fight. Tsukushima is able to use it on inanimate objects just by cutting the ground. He can make it so he was there in the locations past to have added traps to it. So it's a bit of a trippy ability for sure. Just by striking the floor, Tsukushima can act on hours of time alone with this location, essentially. But the craziest one, and in my opinion the one that probably gets overlooked the most, is actually when he strikes Byakuya. Now, Tsukishima versus Byakuya is a fight I can't wait to talk about. It is going to be the one we do next, and it is one of my favourite fights in the series. But actually, when you think about it, Byakuya should obviously be leagues ahead of Tsukishima in terms of strength. Being a captain of hundreds of years of experience, one of the most powerful captains as well, and Tsukishima at the end of the day is just a human. But Tsukishima can keep up with him because when he lands one successful strike on Byakuya, he inserts himself into Byakuya's past as the person who taught Byakuya everything he knows about fighting. Which means, naturally, Tsukishima should, to make the lie believable, be at least as strong as Byakuya, and he actually gains that strength. Byakuya says to him that he can't believe that 2 years of training will be worthless, but Tsukishima says, well, they're not worthless, it's just I've improved by the same amount. He can literally bridge the gap in strength and experience between the two of them just by cutting him, which is completely insane. So Book of the End's power does seem truly limitless, and in the hands of someone as vacant of emotion as Tsukishima, at least to most people, he seems to hold them in complete emotional disregard. He seems emotionally detached from just about every single person he meets. I do believe it's implied that maybe he and Riruka had some kind of a relationship in the past. He made her an item called the Love Gun, and there's a bit later on as well when Ginjo mentions how Tsukishima might be seen by each person, and I believe he says a lover and Riruka's on the panel. But for the most part, he does hold complete detachment from everyone and everything. And Kubo even draws him in an interesting way as well, where his eyes look completely unlike nearly any other character in the series, and they are nearly almost completely soullessly black in the manga, which is a really, really cool touch. And I do think it's all just supposed to convey the idea of this machine almost. He is inhuman and statuesque in the way he operates. He doesn't care about anyone or anything apart from Ginjo and doing what Ginjo wants, and to that end he is happy to just absolutely ruin lives. You know, when they reduce Ichigo to a crying mess on the floor, they were just going to leave him like that. Now, Ginjo obviously has this idea in his head that he's sparing Ichigo by not killing him, but Ichigo's friends would remain antagonistic towards him until the moment of Tsukishima's death. So really they are ruining Ichigo's life and just leaving him. And it is truly a very dark moment in Bleach when Ichigo is reduced to that. Also probably one of the best moments as well when he comes back and gets his powers back. That's great stuff. But that's what I mean. The actual build-up and the use of Book of the End throughout the Lost Agent arc to the eventual escalation and that final showdown is really well done. And Book of the End is truly a through line throughout the entire arc, and it's evidence as well, in my opinion, of how well the arc was planned for the most part. Kubo could have gone deeper on context and villain backstories and stuff like that, but the actual arc itself is written really well. You know, Book of the End is activated against Orihime very early on, and then she mentions a little bit later on that she sees Tsukishima as a friend for some reason, which doesn't quite understand why. Then, you know, it happens to Chad, and then Uryu starts to cotton on that something's wrong. And then eventually it all comes down to Orihime and Chad fighting Ichigo because they now see Tsukishima as a full-on friend. And it's really, really cool. And that idea of the bonds of friendship is what I want to talk about next. One of the main themes about Bleach is friends and the bonds of friendship and protecting those bonds and protecting your friends. And Tsukishima is a unique character and a unique villain in Bleach in that he is all about utterly subverting those bonds and turning them on their heads. Not many other bad guys in the series really do that, but Tsukishima truly targets the heart of Ichigo where no one else really does, and he really targets Ichigo's home. It doesn't get any closer to home than Ichigo's own sisters turning against him because they see Tsukishima as someone they actually know and love. And I do think that by making Tsukishima into this kind of a villain, Kubo is trying to make him as despicable as possible. And I really like that. I think it's really cool. I think it was honestly pretty bold of Kubo to actually take the Lost Agent arc in the direction he did, because I don't think anyone really saw it coming, despite the gradual build-up of Book of the End and its prevalence in the arc. I don't think anyone saw the almost horror movie, zombie-style ending actually going to happen, where all of Ichigo's friends are revealed to have been affected by Tsukishima. They all see him as someone they love and care about, and so the fact that Ichigo is trying to kill him is not going down well with them, and he ends up fighting Chad and Orihime, and it's really, it's honestly powerful stuff. And I know a lot of people didn't like the arc, but I think most people can agree that the ending is pretty good. There are panels like Ichigo running out of the smashed window of his own home is really cool. And yeah, I just think that for the most part, Tsukishima's powers are built up really well, and he himself is made out to be a despicable villain, the likes of which is attacking Ichigo's heart like no one ever has before. And I think what's crucial here is we don't know necessarily how Ginjo wanted this to play out. All we can assume is that Ginjo wanted Tsukishima to make Ichigo despair, and then had himself cut so that he would play the role of a good guy believably. So after that, he leaves it in Tsukishima's hands. And Tsukishima goes around cutting Ichigo's friends and his closest family members and making them all turn against him. And Ichigo does break down like never before, even wanting to kill Tsukishima, which you have to remember, Ichigo is the main hero here, and that is nearly unthinkable for him. But I do think the idea of toying with their bonds, with the bonds of this main group of Bleach, and actually daring to pull them apart, is really powerful storytelling, and I think it's really good to narrow the stakes like that, and I think it does make it more emotionally affecting. And I want to compare Tsukishima briefly to other major villains in the series. So let's take Aizen, for example. Now, Aizen's a good one to compare him to, because Aizen wants to destroy Karakura Town. Now, that's obviously really bad news for Ichigo, because he lives there, his family lives there, his friends live there, and Aizen wants to kill them all. However, there's something impersonal about this. Because Aizen wants to just wipe out Karakura Town as a whole, it feels very impersonal. It feels very grandiose. It feels very super villainesque. Don't get me wrong, I love Aizen, I like the plan is cool and everything like that, but there's a definite feeling that Ichigo is only there out of a sense of duty, and that's actually brought up by Aizen as well. When Ichigo tries to fight Aizen and it feels a bit half-hearted, Aizen even comments like, "Why are you here? Your friends are all clearly absolutely fine. You're just swinging your sword out of a misplaced sense of duty to the Gotei 13. And I think it's a really fascinating idea. Because it's true, Ichigo is fighting Aizen because he feels like he has to, because he feels like he is the hero. And of course he wants to protect Karakura Town, but so does everyone else. You know, that's just the end goal. The Shinigami are there doing the same thing. It feels like Ichigo's part of an army. Aizen himself has not personally targeted Ichigo's friends. Orihime's fine, again, something Aizen even points out. He's like, Orihime's, she's alright. You know, none of your friends are dead. So why are you swinging your sword at me? Whereas with Tsukishima, it's incredibly personal. The whole thing is personal, and Ichigo wants to kill him. And I think it's a really interesting distinction, and it makes sense as well, because Tsukishima doesn't have these grandiose plans. In many ways, I feel like Tsukishima can be kind of compared to the Joker. Like, you know, he's just this guy who comes out of nowhere, he has no real backstory, no creditable backstory, and he just wants the world to burn. He just wants to cause anguish for Ichigo. And I think it's really fascinating to compare him to, shall we say, a more typical bad guy. Like, Aizen has a typical bad guy plan, and therefore Ichigo feels he has to stop him. And the same kind of goes for Yhwach as well. Kubo does try and make it personal with Yhwach by having him be the one who caused Masaki's death. But it still never really gets to that feeling. It's still, because I don't think it's dwelled on enough. It's never brought up that much again. It's very brief if it is. Whereas Tsukishima affecting Ichigo's friends and family is the major climactic showdown of the Lost Agent arc. So I think personal stakes is one thing that arc does really well. So at the end of the day, how evil is Tsukishima? Like, I do feel like he had this sense of feeling very alone, which is something he brings up on his deathbed, essentially. He thought he was alone all the time, but kind of thanks to Ginjo and thanks to Mo, who has essentially forgiven him for... Because Mo overhears Ginjo and Tsukishima talking about killing him eventually, but Mo, is the bigger man, and he kind of says, I'm still here for you. So Tsukishima realises that actually he's not alone. But Tsukishima is a weird character because he doesn't seem, once you discover that actually he's kind of Ginjo's right-hand man, he feels very much like he doesn't have too much in the way of his own thoughts. He feels like he's doing everything for Ginjo. But I do love the fight with him and Byakuya. I love Byakuya's reasoning for beating him and for beating Book of the End, which is simply, I may know you, and you may be the one who taught me everything. Obviously he's not, but for the time being, Byakuya still believes he is, but it doesn't matter. He's caused Ichigo a lot of emotional pain, and so he has to die. And I think that's really good, and I think that is a conduit for Kubo himself. I think Byakuya is the voice of Kubo in this scene. I think he says, I hate the way you fight, I despise your cowardice, you sever the bonds of friendship and then get them to fight each other without lifting a hand of your own. So Byakuya says that he will kill him and toss him aside, and it's really harsh words from someone who has learnt the importance of bonds of friendship from Ichigo himself. So there's an awful lot to be said in this topic. The themes of Bleach, the idea of the bonds of friendship and creating new bonds, and the fact that Tsukishima exists just to sever them for his own twisted game, these own false bonds he creates, does make him a despicable bad guy for sure. The depth of his evil, I think, can be debated because he is working for Ginjo. He's doing what he thinks will make Ginjo happy. But a lot of this is on Tsukishima. It's him who is choosing how to make Ichigo despair. He's affecting all of Ichigo's friends and doesn't seem to have a care in the world about it. So I think it's a fascinating character with an equally fascinating and powerful ability, and one that truly does go against the idea of friendship. And he really is a villain who actually strikes at the heart of Bleach's core themes, which I think is why I find him so fascinating. So I definitely think Tsukishima is easily one of, if not the most evil characters in Bleach. But what do you think? What do you think about Tsukishima as a character on the whole? Like I said, we'll do a character analysis for him in the future, and a battle analysis with Byakuya too will be coming up. But what do you think of Tsukishima, and what do you think, perhaps more importantly, of Book of the End? Let me know in the comments below what you think about the Lost Agent arc too, and do you think the ending was, as I said, I think quite powerful, and I like the personal stakes? Let me know, do you prefer the more personal storylines, or do you prefer the big bombastic stuff? I'd love to know in the comments below. But until next time, guys, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then. Goodbye.